Hello, good day. That's what I've learned so far. It's really lovely to be here. Thank you so much for letting me come. The opportunity to meet you, to hear some of your stories about what God's doing in your midst, the questions that you're grappling with. We share lots of them in England. What does it really look like for us, the church today, to reach those outside of the church? And what can sometimes feel like an overwhelming mission. And if it wasn't God's and He wasn't leading it, then we'd all be in trouble. But thankfully He is. And so today I just wanted to share a little bit of our journey, I guess, but also some of the things that we've been thinking and grappling with in London and in the UK in terms of reaching out to those outside of the church. The disclaimer to all of this is, of course, that I'm no expert, and I've yet to meet anybody who is, bar God Himself, and it's the Holy Spirit who continues to inspire and anoint and equip and call people to fulfill God's mission here on earth. And as you know, you can't do it without Him. I know I can't do it without Him. So I hope whatever I share today, you'll take in the, I hope comes with that humility of, I'm a learner and I'm going to be a lifelong learner, as I'm sure you are and have been for quite some time when it comes to engaging with God's heart for those outside of the church. There's a website called missionalcommunitieslovelondon.com, and it's really rough and ready. It's quite new, and I'm just getting stuff up there as we go. But people always say to me, what's a missional community? What's going on in London? So I'm just trying to get those people who are involved in missional communities to post stuff up. It's like a collaborative blog on Posterous. Getting guys to put stuff up is like, drawing blood from a stone, because they're pioneers and they're always working and doing stuff. So, the bloggers tend to be the people who are always reflecting on mission, and the pioneers are the ones who are getting on with it. So getting those guys to blog is quite hard. But so every now and again, stuff will go up. So feel free to have a nose around. So I want to just think a little bit about. Sorry, there might be a delay on this. I'm not going to zap anyone if I do this, am I? If I hear a at the back, oh no. Oh, here we go. Okay, so thinking a little bit about the model of church that we know. And I guess for a lot of us, we'll have come from an attractional model of church, a church that says, come to us, and we learn about Jesus, we learn about God, there on the terms of that church, and very much we're walking into a culture that pre-exists. And this model has been around for years and years and years and years and years and years. Probably sometime around 4 AD, that model, when Constantine instituted the church, or Christendom, came into being. So that approach is, would you like to come and join us? You can hear about God here in this church building. You get discipled here. This is where you experience the sacraments and so on. I grew up in that model of church. That is how I met Jesus. So I'm not here to in any way slight the fruit of that model of church whatsoever. But over time, and we've seen it in the West through the decline of people going to church, that model has less and less impact and influence. And there are now people in England, a third of people in our national population have never ever heard the gospel. They've never ever been to church. They've never been exposed to Christian gatherings like that of any sort. And we've now got over a third of the population who are de-churched, people who have been burnt, hurt, who are frustrated. Hello. Be careful, he's putting batteries in now. So that's 2/3 of our population who are not engaging with church whatsoever. So we're having to ask ourselves big questions about how we're going to reach out to people who are not coming to church and don't see church as a place to come, or a place that's relevant to their lives whatsoever. Would you mind clicking to the next slide, please? Thanks very much. In this model of church, thanks very much. Great. Let's go back one. Sorry, just to say as well, classic to this model of church, that they're very centered around church buildings. We have an institutionally ordained leadership. Someone like me, some of you here will be ordained too, and a top-down organizational structure. And the priesthood of all believers, the laity, moving in the fivefold ministries, will totally depend on whether or not the ordained leader in that church really believes in that, models it, equips and empowers the people in that church to lead themselves in that way. And also discipleship, often in this model, centers around the transfer of ideas, thinking that right thinking will lead to right behavior. And this has been influenced since the 4th century, again, from the Platonic Hellenistic idea of how we learn and how we grow up and how we self-actualize and so on. But this is very, very different to the Hebraic understanding of how we learn. The Hebraic understanding of how we learn was that right action leads to right behavior, and we see that modeled in the life of Jesus. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. So the church in the West is in a long-trended decline, and I guess the question is, if we just keep doing church the way we do it, if we rework it a little bit, touch it up, turn the music up a bit more, get the musicians singing in tune, work it a little bit harder, will we get people back to church? The guy who spoke before me, I missed his name, I'm really sorry, he talked about the glasses that we wear. And this is really important, I think, when we start to grapple with how are we going to reach our culture with the good news about Jesus. Because all around us there are paradigms. Paradigms are the way that we think, the worldviews that we have, and they're influenced by culture and tradition and relationships. And they're like the glasses that we wear through which we see the world, through which we consider things true or not. They affect the way that we think and the way that we act. And there are 3 primary paradigms, you could say, all around us in the world today. I'm in the way, aren't I, completely? So we have a Western paradigm, which I'm sure many of us will be familiar with. There's an Eastern paradigm, some of us may be familiar with, and a postmodern one. And I guess the question that we need to be thinking about as we're thinking, what does it really look like to be engaging missionally with our culture, is how do we go about revealing a gospel paradigm in the midst of all these other paradigms? So to whisk through very, very quickly, the Western paradigm, which has been around, I guess, since about the 17th century, since the Enlightenment, focuses very much on when we think about belief, thinks very much about we can know absolute truth. Absolute truth exists, and it's out there, and we can discover what it is if we can prove it empirically and reasonably. So it's about rationalism. The Eastern paradigm, which is very much, I guess, Eastern cultures are those that weren't conquered by the Roman Empire. You could say Muslim, Buddhist, the Eastern Orthodox Church, Celtic Christianity in Europe, and so on. They have a different approach to knowing truth, which is very much based on faith. That the whole of life is holistic, and we learn what is true through those who have gone before us. It's passed down. And we receive that truth through those relationships. So it's through trusted people in our lives, people that we give authority to. So it's passed down. And in our postmodern culture, which has been around probably since the 1960s, increasingly, truth is relative. So it's about what feels right for me. that's true for me. It might not be true for you, but that's okay, because it doesn't feel right for you. But it feels right for me, so this is the truth I adopt for my life, and that's my worldview. The gospel response is different. The gospel response is that we can discover truth, that Jesus came as one of us, revealed himself to us, scriptures reveal that to us, but also the Holy Spirit continues to make that known to the hearts of man and woman throughout history, and that it is possible to discover Jesus in our midst today, to encounter him. So for us, when we consider how we're going to do mission out into our culture, one of the things that we need to think about is, what does it look like to create spaces where people can discover and encounter Jesus today afresh? What does it look like for them to consider making his truth claims their truth claims, to try and test them, to see them modeled in a community around them, to see them lived out and worked out and real. Secondly, how we view relationships. In the Western paradigm, we're very individualistic and autonomous, and we compartmentalize our lives. I say we because I'm assuming that lots of us here have grown up in those cultures and know that paradigm very well. The Eastern paradigm is much more holistic. People live much more interconnected lives, whereas in the Western paradigm, family is probably a mum and a dad and a couple of kids, and that's increasingly breaking down. In an Eastern paradigm, family is 3 generations all together gathering in. Weddings are, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people popping up in places like India or Africa. Some of you may have been to weddings like that, which start a week before the wedding and go on a week after, and 1,000 people get fed, and calves are fattened and killed, and et cetera, et cetera. In the postmodern, it's much more pluralistic, and people have people's relationships, and the relationships that we give authority in our lives can be quite diverse, coming from all different places. The gospel response, again, as we know, is that we are a spiritual family, that we are children of God, and that when we come to know Jesus, we get adopted and we get brought into this very inclusive community. And it's a family that exists for its at that moment, non-family members, people who are at that stage not part of the family, or they don't know themselves as part of that family, but seeks to reach out to other people and see them adopted into that family. Thirdly, what we value. In the West, we value security. Think about what we invest our money in, all sorts of, like whether it's homes, cars, education, all sorts of things. There are things that we deem as giving us security, and it matters to us to invest in those. In the East, it's not so much about acquiring things or security, but it's very much about legacy. It's like, what will we leave the future generation? For postmoderns, it's very much about gratification, whereas in the West, we might work to live. Sorry, I've got the wrong way around. In the West, we might live to work. Postmoderns work to live. It's very much about, it's a means to an end, to then be able to get on and do the things that you want to do, that you love doing. Very much living for the moment, not necessarily thinking very much about the future. The gospel response to that is about eternity. And how do we introduce people to a God who is present now, to an eternity, since the reality of the resurrection, that Jesus has begun God's work of new creation, that the heavens and earth will one day be renewed, be made one, and that we will live under the lordship and reign of Jesus forever. And it starts now and goes into eternity. What does that look like for us to begin to reveal that to those around us? How we influence. In the West, traditionally or historically, it's been quite institutional. Think about the church, models of government, the military, and so on. Business, it's very institutional. In the East, very much tradition. Again, it's back to the interconnectedness and the relationships that people are influenced by the people in authority in their lives that they trust. Could be elders in a community, could be teachers, could be grandmas and granddads, etc., etc. Postmoderns, they influence through deconstructing, by pulling everything apart, and they're probably known more for what they don't believe in than maybe what they do. So they're not necessarily sure what they believe in, but they deconstruct what has gone before. The gospel response to that, I guess, for us is like, what does it look like for us to begin to model what we believe to be true, to live by it, and to reveal it, to incarnate it, for it to be seen to be believed before it's believed or chosen? And finally, how do we measure success? In the West, we very much look at the end product, the end result, and that's very much often profits, and in church, it's normally bums on seats, and how much people are giving, etc. In the Eastern view, it's process, that actually it's what happens along the way that matters more than necessarily the end result. And it's not rushing to the end and missing what might be happening in the process. For postmoderns, it's very much about feeling connected with the world, feeling that if you have a sense of peace about what you're doing, personally you feel that your contribution is making a difference, that you're part of a community where you share a worldview, then you have a sense of fulfillment. And you can be happy with life. And I guess the gospel response for that would be transformation, that we see the fruit of the kingdom in the change that occurs in people's lives, which can be immediate and it can take years. If you're anything like me, it's taking some years. But actually that transformation is the fruit of God at work in people's lives. So there's just a very whistle-stop look at three paradigms which are around us all the time as we consider what it looks like for us to engage missionally, and questions about how do we then respond with what is a gospel response, a gospel worldview in the lives of those around us. So, what's a fresh expression? A fresh expression is a form of church for our changing culture. Looking at those three paradigms, you can just see already, like from the Western even to the postmodern, there's been quite a shift in how we think, how people approach knowing truth, the influences in people's lives, and so on. It's established primarily for the benefit of people who are not yet members of any church. And whilst there is no formula, and fresh expressions aren't something to be cloned, we could consider that there are some steps along the way to a fresh expression emerging, developing, and being established. And I want us just to have a little think about those now. So I guess the first step is listening. And I think for us this is one of the hardest things because, especially in our Western mindset, we want to get right to the end goal. We want to see results. I think, especially if you've been in church for a little while, we get really programmatic and results-driven. To begin in that stage of listening and to remain in that stage of listening and being prayerful, it can be really, really tough for us. But I think with fresh expressions, it is about discernment more than strategic planning. It's asking God, what are you doing in this community, in this culture that we're trying to reach? What is going on? Help me to see what is going on in the hearts and minds of these people. Help me to hear what their cries are. Help me to hear what you're doing. We're looking for the Holy Spirit opportunities. And then out of listening comes loving and serving. Again, I'll talk about incarnation in a minute, but Jesus came into the world, sent by the Father, was the mission to show his love, his life, to invite us to receive the full life that God had for us and come into his kingdom, to receive forgiveness, healing, and wholeness. But he also came in a certain way. He had his mode of coming was in the flesh, and he chose a posture which communicated the truth that he'd come to share with us. And I think this is really important. Jesus himself said, "I didn't come to be served, but to serve." And he sent his disciples out to serve too. So at the beginning stages of a fresh expression, we're looking at how can we love and how can we serve the community that that God is calling us to reach out to. And this is the beginning of incarnational mission. From that stage, we move on to building community, building authentic relationships. Someone I was talking to yesterday said, that just feels like it's the buzzword at the moment, authentic. And then you kind of get fed up of hearing it after a while because everyone's just saying it and you're like, is anyone living it? That's a joke. But yeah, so that kind of thing about what does it really mean to be authentic? But it's so important when we're building relationships with people, and you know what it's like when people who are outside of the church, they can see through the agendas so quickly. They can see through when we're trying to be coercive. They can feel it. We feel it when people are trying to coerce us into anything. So what does it really look like to build these genuine relationships? That we, in those relationships, are transparent, that we're living our lives plainly before people. They can see how faith is lived and worked out in our lives whilst we're living and serving them. And out of this building relationships, we find that we have ground beneath our feet to actually share our faith, because we've built trust, and people begin to have questions regarding the way we live in relation to into their lives and the issues that they're facing. Trust is everything, as we know. Trust is the ground, and we can begin to talk more about God, and this is how discipleship begins. Jumping ahead slightly, and then I'll come back again to the discipleship piece. As we begin to share faith with people and explore who God is, and they can begin to encounter him for themselves, we find church taking shape. And it can be such a temptation at this point to begin or to import church as we've known it. But I think at that point, that's exactly the point we have to lay that down. And we have to ask the question, what does it really look like for these people who are now beginning to encounter God and to really come alive to the kingdom of God and his plans and purposes for their lives, to start to gather around Jesus and express something that is authentic and true and legitimate for them. And that may look like something that you would never, ever choose to go to. And it might be a style of worship that you really don't like. It might be, it just may be a form of church that you personally just ordinarily would never choose. But this is not about church for us. This is about church for the people that we're reaching out to. And when you get to the end of that, easy, you do it all again. I was talking to someone earlier today about Soul Survivor Church, which I used to be part of. And when it started, it was a church for young people. It was reaching out to young people. And now they've all grown up and they got married and they've got kids. And someone was saying the other day, we're not being true to our DNA. And it's like, well, no, you are. This is who you've become as a mature body of Jesus, part of the body of Jesus. But if you feel called to reach out to young people, then it's not about bridging young people into this. It's about going again. It's time to go again. Who feels called to go? Who's God calling? So that's a bit of the journey. And you might say that there are 4 characteristics that we can think about. 1, that a fresh expression is missional, that we're sent. We're sent to a group of people outside of the church to serve them. That 2, it's contextual, that we're listening to the people that we're sent to, and we're entering into their culture. 3, it's all about making disciples, real, genuine, authentic disciples of Jesus. And 4, that at the end of all of that, a church will form and gather and grow. Let's talk about mission. Lots has been said about mission over the last 24 hours, so I don't want to repeat and also bore you by repeating. But I guess at the heart, of this whole conference is that reminder that Jesus is sending us just as the Father sent him. That mission is God's thing. It's always been God's thing, right from Genesis 1, when the Spirit hovered over the deep, when God spoke and he ordered chaos and brought about creation, that God is a God of movement. The Spirit is moving out all the time to bring order out of the chaos and life and creativity, and we are part of that. I'm pointing it the wrong way. It's not helping, is it? When we think about churches we've known it, churches we're part of, and mission, we might consider or be able to locate ourselves within 3 different types of church, and I just want to think about where Fresh Expression sits in this. So that's not a great picture for you to see, but what it says here is that, so at the bottom you've got attractional church. And as I said before, attractional church very much works off the premise of inviting people to come to us. It's a come to us approach. You come to us and this is where we'll share the gospel with you. This is where you can encounter Jesus. And it may be involved in its local community, but if it is, it's to create a stepping stone for people to come into the church and discover Jesus. Then secondly, you have engaged church. And that line across the middle, I guess, is engagement with culture. Engaged churches would be more active in their community. Social justice and social transformation would be like roaring at the heart of that church, and they'd be looking at ways that they can serve that local community or the culture. But when it comes to inviting people to encounter more of Jesus and his love, then there is a hope that people will bridge people into the church again to discover that. At the top, you've got incarnational churches, and they're very heavily involved in their culture. And at the heart of incarnational church, there is not an assumption that we will bridge people back into the mothership, but that we go to the culture there, we discover what Jesus is doing there, we nurture and build relationships there, and then we seek to plant church there among that group of people. Social action is important. Social transformation is part of it because it's part of what the kingdom's all about, but it's not the whole story. So incarnation is really important. The Word became flesh, and he made his dwelling place among us. Secondly, after mission, there's context. When we think about context, questions of context, then we're asking ourselves, what issues are facing the people that we're trying to meet? What excites them? What irritates them? What does God mean for them? And where are they currently seeking redemption? These are questions that we ask when we go into these new contexts. Part of that whole listening time and loving and serving is also about observing and understanding the social rhythms of the groups that we're trying to meet and reach, and the relational networks that they have. Similarly, we ask and look at where they appreciate meeting. I work with a missional community in Shepherd's Bush. It's mostly 20s and 30s who are working in the music industry. They live in the pub. On Sunday nights, when all the other Christians, most of the other Christians I know who are in church, all of the guys that we're trying to reach are in the pub, getting quite lagered. And that's church for them. You know, even up to like 11:30 at night, they're still in the pub. You can see lots of them, some of them don't want to go to work Monday morning, and they just want to stay with the community that they have in the pub. That's where they like gathering. And so fourthly, then, we consider what does it look like to try and articulate the gospel, to seed and embed it among that group of people, so that it's genuinely part of their culture, and they begin to adopt it, to find language, to describe it, to embrace it for themselves, and to orientate their lives around it. Thirdly, disciple making. I've been, I guess, involved in church ministry since I was 24. I'm now 37. I had to think then. And when I think about how I've grown as a disciple of Jesus, I know without a shadow of a doubt it's been because of actually a few people who've really invested in me, who've spent time with me, who've mentored me, who've modeled to me what the Christian life really looks like. And when I think about all the talks I've sat through, most of which I've enjoyed, I know that I can't remember half of them. And actually, only a few have probably given me the tools and the skills to go away and live my life for Jesus. But actually, the most powerful, powerful thing have been the people that have invested in me and modeled the life to me. And we know this to be true of the life of Jesus. How on earth is it possible that we're sitting here today, and you look back over history and you consider the millions and millions and millions of people who've come to know Jesus? When you think about it, he entrusted that to 12 people, and then that grew to 72, and then that grew to 120. And do you ever just think, what if you'd been one of those 12 people? I'd have felt overwhelmed. But that is how Jesus chose to communicate, to continue to share and to see the kingdom extend beyond his ministry and after he had ascended into heaven. So discipleship's key. We get the discipleship DNA right, and we have radical disciples of Jesus who can go and who embody and can communicate and share the gospel with others. Jesus told us, obviously, to go and make disciples of other people, of all nations. And it's through discipleship that we get equipped as Christians to promote the kingdom. And ultimately, if we get the DNA right, if our DNA is good, we're imitating Jesus and we make radical disciples of others, then we're going to make the best kind of leaders. We're going to see the best kind of leaders raised up. In Fresh Expressions, I think a key thing is realizing that discipleship starts before conversion. I've come from a lot of evangelical sort of churches, and we see conversion as the beginning. We may not say it, but we do. But actually, discipleship starts way before then. Secondly, listening is so key for us as we seek to disciple others, to really hear their story. Because discipleship starts long before conversion, because people's stories are sacred, because God has made people in his image, and because he's been at work in their life since they were conceived, they will be able to tell you, once you start to talk to them and ask them about their story, about some things which they haven't even realized yet, about the way God has been involved in their lives. But as they share, we're able to say, that's amazing. Tell me more about that. Tell me more about that person who revealed love to you in that way. Tell me more about that divine encounter you had with that person. Tell me more about how you got that job. Tell me more about the influence that you seem to have been given for good. Tell me more. And we can start to bless and nurture in people, awaken them to God's sometimes invisible, but quiet, the quiet moves of the Spirit in their life. As we seek also to disciple people outside of the church, it's just really important that we address the whole of life, and not just, not confine spirituality to just the personal or the private, but we consider what does it really mean for them to be a follower of Jesus across the whole of their life. We nurture community. In London, it's so key. The guys, again, in Shepherd's Bush who are doing missional community, like loads of the non-Christians who are now part of that, but none of them would say they're Christians, but they all talk about how they've got this community, and that all their other friends are really jealous because they have this community that is there for them, that they are part of, and now all their friends, other friends who are jealous, are now moving to be part of the community because people are so hungry for community. that we provide plenty of support for people as they journey faith, as they journey life, that we begin to rethink worship and learning and spiritual practices. We ask the question, what makes you come alive? And people will say things like, I love writing, I love art, I love listening and writing music, I love taking walks in nature. And we'll say, have you ever thought that you might encounter God in those times? Have you ever thought about opening up your heart and praying in those moments, in those times when you really come alive? Because that's obviously how they're wired, and God's wired them. And we encourage a reliance on the Holy Spirit. We introduce people to the power of God, to healing, to words of knowledge and prophecy. People begin to discover that there's a holy supernatural God in their midst that they had no idea about, or perhaps they had hoped there might be. And we introduce him to them through some supernatural Holy Spirit moves. I'm going to jump ahead of that. So a key question, I guess, that always gets asked whenever we start to play with the hardware and the software of church, and we think about fresh expressions, is, but are they church? I've heard people say, they're just add-ons to ministry, and be quite negative. But I guess it's important for us to reflect on this and to ask, is this church, and what is church? What must always happen in church, or what do we think should always happen in church? What's up for grabs? What can change? And what should be preserved? I'm in part of the Church of England, and we have an archbishop called Rowan Williams. Some of you will know him from the TV, maybe. All our bishops have a lot of facial hair. They're easy to spot. That's why I think it's a cautionary tale for the women to want to become bishops. So he said that church is what... have I jumped ahead? Sorry. Church is what happens when people encounter the risen Jesus and commit themselves to sustaining and deepening that encounter in their encounter with each other. What I really like about that is it's putting Jesus right at the center where he should be. It's stripping away some of the other stuff that we attach that has meant something for us, but may not necessarily be imperative to church happening for the cultures that we're trying to reach. But it's actually about saying, let's focus it all back on Jesus. Let's gather people around him. Let's help people journey faith together. Let's begin to encounter him and serve him as a body. It's putting Jesus at the beginning again, or at the center, and then considering our missiology in response to who he is. And missiology being the purposes of God and his people in the world today. And then it's allowing church to take shape, the form and the function, spilling out from the missiology, which is always tethered to who Jesus is. You could say it's got 4 dimensions. This is old school, but I think it still stands. That there's an up dimension, but our relationship with God, cultivating that personal intimacy, relying on the Spirit, reading the Bible, knowing his word, knowing his voice, being holy, becoming holy. And in dimension, those relationships as community, as that spiritual family, that when we're looking at the paradigms at the beginning, becoming and growing in community, that inclusive community, and reaching out to others. The out dimension in mission, being sent, continually being sent, never, never, never not being sent. And the of dimension, being part of a whole body of Christ. And so as a fresh expression being linked up to old expressions, new expressions, whichever expressions of communities who are living lives of love and service to Jesus. So that's a little bit about fresh expressions. I wanted to share with you some resources which might be helpful. There's something called the Share Guide for practitioners and people who are exploring fresh expressions. And Fresh Expressions in the UK has a website as well, which you can look at. There's also a resource called Awaken and Activate, which was produced by CRM. This is an Awaken manual. I use this with all the kind of like pioneers that I work with in London. It's a brilliant tool in terms of discipleship. There are 3 stages to it. You effectively build a timeline with people, the first stage, and they look at all their whole life and all the positive and painful events, circumstances, and relationships in their life, and they build a timeline. And what you start to see, people start to see, is their own sacred journey. How has God shaped them? What is the destiny that God has for them? And what steps can they take to fulfill that with him and participate in that with him? So that's Awaken and Activate. It's all about helping people take the steps to go for it with God in that way. Lots of you, I know about St. Thomas Crooks in Sheffield, or it's St. Thomas Philadelphia now, that very much, they were a very big church which changed completely its model and form of being and doing church and shifted into a missional communities model. So all over Sheffield there are missional communities, and when they do gather as big church, it's really to celebrate and share stories, but big church and services is not the main event and it's not the main focus. The smaller and medium gathering sizes are, and they really ask the question of what does it look like to disciple, to be and make disciples. And then there's the Forgotten Ways website, which Alan Hirsch and others contribute to. Lots of you will know Alan Hirsch, who's a great practitioner and theologian on missional church. Here's some books: The Tangible Kingdom, by, I always forget how to say their names, Hugh Halter and Matt Smay. Some of you may have come across them. That's a great book if you're looking at how do you transition or consider moving from being an attractional model of church to an incarnational model, and a church that is sending people out to plant new expressions of church. And they've got a primer for people, communities that are asking those questions, and you can work through it together. The Forgotten Ways by Alan Hirsch, and Re-Jesus, which he also wrote, which is all about rewiring the church back to its founder and connecting back with Jesus and his mission today. You can tell I nicked these from Amazon, can't you? Because of the look inside. Organic Church, good book by Neil Cole, and The House Church, or The Church That Jesus Built, by Wolfgang Simpson, which I absolutely love. That guy's got some amazing insights. The Irresistible Revolution, people who are trying to live missionally together as organic communities. Lots of you will know Shane Claiborne. And then my favourite theologian at the moment, N.T. Wright, who wrote Surprised by Hope, and he also wrote Virtue Reborn and a whole heap of other books, which are looking at when we really take seriously the impact of the resurrection and the new creation that began at that moment, and God's work of restoring and renewing creation and what's going to happen when Jesus returns. You'll just get tingles. So enjoy that book. That's it.